Daniel Carter had spent most of his life moving from one cattle trail to another. He was a tall man with a sunburned face, a pair of steady brown eyes, and hands rough from years of hard work. Ever since he was a boy, he dreamed of owning his own land, a place where he could finally put down roots instead of sleeping under the open sky. But land in the Wild West was not cheap, and for a man with only modest savings, the dream always seemed out of reach. Still, Daniel saved every coin he earned, turning away from whiskey, gambling, and other temptations. His life was not full of luxuries, but it was filled with determination. One chilly morning, Daniel rode into town on his trusted horse, a bay gelding named Copper. The air was filled with the sounds of wagons, traders, and cowboys calling out greetings. On that day, the town square was crowded for a special reason, an auction. Word had spread that a large ranch on the outskirts of town was being sold after its previous owner failed to pay debts. The ranch had once been respected, but the foreclosure left it abandoned, its cattle scattered and its fences broken. Daniel did not expect much. In truth, he thought the wealthy ranchers of the region would fight each other for it. But something in his heart told him to attend. Maybe he could at least see how much land costs these days. Maybe he could learn what men with power and money thought was valuable. He tied Copper by the general store, dusted off his hat, and walked toward the auction block. The auctioneer, a short man with a booming voice, stood on a wooden platform. Beside him was the sheriff ensuring order. A few men Daniel recognized were there, rich ranchers with fine suits, shiny boots, and pocket watches. They spoke in low tones, eyeing Daniel with smirks as if a man like him had no place in such company. He felt the sting of their judgment but kept his eyes forward. He was not there for them. When the auction began, the crowd grew noisy. A small farm was sold first, then a wagon, then a piece of equipment. Finally, the auctioneer announced the item everyone was waiting for, the foreclosed ranch. People leaned forward. It was one of the biggest pieces of land to go up for sale in years. The Carter Ranch, the auctioneer shouted, lifting his hand. 200 acres of pasture, a fine barn, a farmhouse, though it needs repair, and plenty of water rights. Who will start the bidding? The crowd murmured. Daniel's heart pounded. He had counted his savings many times. He knew he could make only one bid. If someone else offered higher, he would be out. Still, he lifted his chin and stepped forward. $100, he called. The crowd went silent for a moment, then erupted in laughter. $100 was laughably small for such land. Daniel felt the weight of every eye on him. The rich ranchers shook their heads, whispering to one another, but no one raised a hand. The auctioneer looked surprised. "Do I hear 150? He asked, scanning the crowd. Silence followed. The ranch had fallen into disrepair, and many feared it would take too much work to restore. Others claimed the land was cursed after the sudden death of its last owner. Still others said there were debts tied to it that made it a poor investment. Whatever the reason, no one wanted to risk it. Daniel stood tall, refusing to shrink under the laughter. He repeated firmly, $100. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Going once, going twice. His hammer came down with a loud crack. Sold to Daniel Carter! For a moment, Daniel could not believe what he heard. He had just bought a ranch, his own ranch. The crowd buzzed with disbelief. Some muttered about foolishness, others about luck. A few wealthy ranchers looked at Daniel with narrowed eyes as if angry he had walked away with so much land for so little. The sheriff clapped him on the shoulder. Well, son, looks like fortune smiled on you today, he said with a half smile. Daniel thanked him and walked away, ignoring the stares and whispers. He handed over his savings, signed the papers, and was told the land was now his. His heart beat faster with each step, a mixture of joy and fear. Later that afternoon, he saddled Copper and rode toward his new property. The road stretched far, dust rising behind his horse's hooves. Daniel thought about all the work ahead, mending fences, gathering stray cattle, and repairing the roof of the old house. He knew it would be hard, but he had faced hard days before. This was his chance to finally build something of his own. As the sun began to sink, Daniel reached the edge of the land. He paused on a hilltop to look at the wide fields. Grass swayed in the breeze and a stream cut through the valley below. The barn, though weathered, still stood proud. The farmhouse, with its peeling paint and sagging porch, seemed tired but not beyond saving. For the first time, Daniel felt he was not just a cowboy drifting from town to town. He was a landowner, He urged Copper forward, riding toward the farmhouse. The wind carried a faint smell of wood smoke. That puzzled him. No one was supposed to live there anymore. The ranch had been abandoned, hadn't it? He dismounted near the porch, tying Copper to a post. The boards creaked under his boots as he climbed the steps. The door was not locked. He pushed it open slowly, his hand near the revolver at his belt. The inside was dim, shadows flickering from the glow of a fire in the hearth. His eyes adjusted and he froze. A woman stood near the fire, stirring a pot. She wore a simple dress, her dark hair braided neatly over her shoulder. Her back was straight, her movements graceful, as if she belonged there. She turned when she heard him, her eyes widening in surprise. For a moment neither spoke. Daniel was struck by her beauty, her clear eyes, her proud posture, the way she carried herself even in such plain surroundings. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. Daniel removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "Ma'am, I might ask you the same. I bought this ranch at auction today." Her expression hardened. "This is my home. My husband owned this land before he passed. I have nowhere else to go." Daniel felt a wave of confusion wash over him. He had thought he was buying land, a barn, and a house. He never imagined finding someone still living there, especially not someone like her. The woman lifted her chin. "My name is Elena. You may hold the papers, but around here people know that the wife of the ranch owner does not simply disappear when debts come calling." Daniel's mouth went dry. He realized then that the whispers in town were not only about debts or curses. There had been another reason no one wanted to bid. This ranch came with more than land and buildings. It came with a woman whose fate was tied to it. And with that discovery, Daniel's new life as a rancher had just become far more complicated than he ever expected. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, his hat still pressed against his chest, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He had bought a ranch, but here was a woman, living inside the house as though nothing had changed. The firelight flickered across her face, revealing calm strength in her eyes. She was not frightened of him. Instead, she stood tall, as if ready to defend her home no matter the papers he carried. "My husband built this house with his own hands," she said, her voice steady. "He died last winter, and since then I have stayed here. When the bankmen came, they said the land would be taken, but I never left. This house is all I have." Daniel's mind spun. He had no wish to push her out, but neither could he forget that he had paid every coin he owned for the property. He spoke carefully, not wanting to sound harsh. "I understand, ma'am. My name is Daniel Carter. I only came here today because I was told this ranch was empty. If I had known, I would have asked more questions before bidding." Elena folded her arms, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Empty? Do I look like emptiness to you?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "No, ma'am. That isn't what I meant. I only mean that I wasn't told you still lived here." The room grew quiet except for the popping of the firewood. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Elena studied him closely, as though trying to decide whether he was an enemy or someone she might trust. Finally, she set down the wooden spoon she had been holding and pulled out a chair. "If you are the new owner, then sit. We can at least speak like civilized people." Daniel hesitated, but then obeyed. He took a seat at the rough wooden table, its surface marked by years of use. Elena ladled stew from the pot into 2 bowls and placed one in front of him. "Eat. It is not much, but it is warm." He thanked her softly and began to eat. The stew was simple, just beans, carrots, and a little meat, but after a long day it tasted better than any meal he could recall. Elena ate quietly across from him, her eyes flicking up from time to time as though to measure his character. When the meal was nearly done, Daniel cleared his throat. "I don't mean to trouble you, but I must ask, what happens now? The papers say the ranch is mine, but you are still here. I don't want to turn you out, but I can't ignore the law either." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line. "The law," she repeated softly, almost bitterly. "Men with papers think they own everything. But out here things are not always so simple. The townsfolk believe that a woman tied to the land stays until her future is secured. Some say she becomes the duty of the new owner." She looked at him directly. "That is why none of those wealthy ranchers bid today. They did not want to take on that duty." Daniel felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He finally understood why the crowd had laughed, why the sheriff had looked almost amused when he clapped his shoulder. This was more than a bargain ranch. It was a responsibility. "I did not come here for that," he said honestly. "I came for the land. But I won't leave you without help. That isn't my way." Something softened in Elena's eyes, though she quickly looked down into her bowl. "We shall see," she murmured. That night, Daniel did not sleep in the house. Instead, he spread his bedroll on the porch under the stars. It felt wrong to take a room inside while Elena's claim to the place still lingered. As he lay awake, listening to the sounds of crickets and the faint rustle of wind through the grass, he thought about what tomorrow would bring. Could he work alongside this proud woman? Would she ever accept his presence here? He did not know, but one thing was certain. He could not walk away. The next morning, the sun rose golden over the hills, bathing the ranch in warm light. Daniel woke early, saddled Copper, and began inspecting the fences. He found many posts leaning, wires broken, and sections torn by storms or rustlers. It would take weeks to fix everything. As he worked, hammering posts into place, he noticed Elena standing at the porch watching. She did not offer to help, nor did she interrupt. She simply observed, as if testing his resolve. By midday, Daniel's shirt clung with sweat. He paused to wipe his brow when he saw Elena walking toward him with a bucket of water. She held it out silently. He drank deeply, then handed it back with a nod. For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips, though it vanished quickly. Over the next days, a quiet rhythm began to form. Daniel rose early, working from dawn until dusk to repair what he could. Elena continued tending to the house, cooking, mending clothes, and keeping things in order. Though they spoke little, there was a growing sense of uneasy cooperation. One evening, as Daniel carried in firewood, Elena finally broke the silence. "You work harder than most men I have seen," she admitted. "Many would have left by now or gone to town to drink away their time. But you stay." Daniel shrugged modestly. "This land is all I have now. If I want it to be worth anything, I must fight for it. And I'm not the type to waste what I've been given." Elena studied him thoughtfully. "Perhaps you are not like the others after all." Their words hung in the air, a fragile bridge between two lives thrown together by chance. But not everything was so peaceful. Within a week, Daniel noticed signs that trouble lurked nearby. One morning, he found hoofprints leading toward the ranch's northern edge, where a few half-wild cattle grazed. Later, he saw the glint of riders on a distant ridge. Rustlers, most likely, waiting to see if this new owner was weak. Word must have spread in town that the Carter Ranch had fallen into the hands of a drifter, with little more than a horse and determination. Daniel tightened his grip on his tools, vowing not to let them take what little he had. That night, as he sat on the porch sharpening his knife, Elena came out and stood beside him. "You've seen them too," she said quietly. He nodded. "They think this place is easy pickings." Her gaze was steady. "It always has been since my husband died. That is why I stayed. Alone, I could not fight them. But maybe now." She trailed off as if unsure whether to finish the thought. Daniel glanced at her. "Maybe now we stand together," he said firmly. She met his eyes for a long moment, then gave the smallest of nods. It was not surrender nor full trust, but it was something, an unspoken agreement that their futures were now tangled whether they wished it or not. The days ahead would not be easy. Daniel knew that building a ranch was more than fences and barns. It was about protecting what was his, earning respect in the eyes of the town, and proving to Elena that he was not just another man with papers and a claim. And as the evening shadows lengthened across the land, Daniel felt both the weight and the promise of what lay before him. The ranch was no longer just soil and timber. It was a test of strength, patience, and heart. The days stretched into weeks, and Daniel Carter soon realized that owning land was far harder than drifting across cattle trails. Every morning he rose with the sun, shoulders already aching from the work of the day before. He fixed fences, hauled lumber, and searched for scattered cattle. His hands bled from rope burns and his back ached from bending over broken posts, but he never slowed. This land was his, and he would not let it slip away. Elena kept her distance at first. She watched from the porch as Daniel fought through chores most men would have hired hands to do. She cooked meals, tended the house, and mended clothing, but rarely spoke more than a few words. Yet even in her silence, Daniel could feel her presence, sharp as a hawk's gaze. She was always measuring him, always judging whether this stranger deserved to stand where her late husband once had. One afternoon, while Daniel was repairing a section of fence near the stream, a storm rolled in from the west. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and before he could finish, rain began to pour down. Daniel tied Copper beneath a tree for shelter, then struggled to keep the posts from washing away. Suddenly Elena appeared, running through the rain with a sack of nails clutched to her chest. "You'll lose it all if you don't brace the posts," she shouted over the roar of the storm. Daniel blinked in surprise but accepted the nails. Together they hammered reinforcements into the fence, rain soaking their clothes and mud caking their boots. Elena's braids stuck to her back, her face streaked with water, but her hands were steady and sure. She knew the land better than he did, pointing out where the current might pull hardest, where the posts needed extra support. By the time the storm passed, they were covered in mud, but the fence stood strong. Daniel looked at her, chest heaving, and for the first time Elena smiled at him, a real smile, faint but warm. "Perhaps you're not as hopeless as I thought," she said before walking back toward the house. That small moment stayed with Daniel for days. It was the first crack in the wall between them, but not everyone in town looked kindly on Daniel's efforts. The gossip spread quickly. When he rode into town for supplies, men snickered and called out, "How's the wife that came with your bargain?" Others muttered about Elena, saying she was nothing more than property bundled with the land. Daniel clenched his fists but held his tongue. He would not waste energy on their words. Yet deep inside, anger burned. Elena was not property, and he would never treat her as such. One evening, as they ate supper, Daniel finally spoke about it. "Do you know what folks in town are saying? They think you were part of the bargain. They talk like I bought you with the land." Elena's spoon froze halfway to her lips. Slowly, she set it down, her expression unreadable. "They have said such things since the auction. That is why no one else bid." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That isn't right. You're no prize to be traded." Elena studied him for a long moment. "And yet here we are. You own the papers. I live under your roof. Tell me, Daniel, how are you different from the others?" Her words cut deep. Though he knew she spoke from hurt, not cruelty, he leaned forward, his voice firm. "Because I don't see you as something I own. I see you as someone strong, someone keeping this place alive long before I came. I'd sooner give up the land than treat you like property." Elena looked away, but for the first time her eyes softened. She did not reply, but Daniel sensed his words had reached her. The next morning, their uneasy partnership shifted again. Daniel discovered tracks near the northern pasture, fresh hoofprints not from his cattle, rustlers. He returned to the house, jaw set. "We've got company," he told Elena. Her face paled slightly. "They've come before. They take what they want, knowing I cannot fight them alone." Daniel's voice hardened. "Well, I'm here now, and I won't let them steal from us." That night, Daniel stayed awake on the porch, rifle across his lap. Elena sat inside by the fire, glancing toward the door from time to time. Hours passed, the sky filled with stars, until finally he heard the faint sound of horses approaching. He tightened his grip. Shadows moved along the fence line, creeping closer. "Stay inside," Daniel whispered toward the door. Then he stood, stepping into the yard. "That's far enough," he called. The figures froze. There were 3 of them, rough-looking men with bandanas around their necks. One laughed harshly. Well, the new rancher's got teeth. Didn't expect you to last this long." Daniel leveled the rifle. "This land is mine now. You won't take a single cow." The men muttered among themselves. One reached for his pistol, but Daniel fired a warning shot into the dirt. The sound echoed through the night, sending crows scattering from nearby trees. The rustlers cursed, then turned their horses and rode off into the darkness. When Daniel returned to the porch, Elena stood in the doorway, eyes wide. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "Maybe," he said, lowering the rifle. "But this is my land and I'll defend it. And you too." Something changed in her then. She stepped forward and laid a hand lightly on his arm. It was the first time she had touched him since they met. "You're different," she said softly. From that night on, Elena no longer kept her distance. She began working beside him more often, helping drive cattle back from the hills, carrying lumber for repairs, even teaching him where the soil was best for planting. Together they faced the challenges of the land, each day forging a stronger bond. Still, the whispers in town did not stop. Some mocked Daniel for taking in a widow, others sneered at Elena for staying with a stranger. But the 2 of them learned to ignore it. What mattered was the ranch, the cattle, the fences, and the quiet strength growing between them. One evening, as they stood by the corral watching the sunset, Elena spoke quietly. "When my husband died, I thought the land would die with him. I thought I would spend the rest of my life waiting for it to fall apart. But now I see hope again." Daniel turned to her, his voice gentle. "Then let's build that hope together." For the first time, Elena did not argue, nor did she guard her words. She simply nodded, her eyes reflecting the fading light. But even as they found this fragile peace, Daniel knew danger still lurked. The rustlers would return, and perhaps worse. The wealthy ranchers in town who mocked him would not stand by forever, watching a drifter succeed where they had refused to try. The battle for the Carter Ranch had only just begun. The weeks passed, and the Carter Ranch slowly began to change. Where broken fences once sagged, new posts now stood firm. Where weeds had choked the fields, fresh grass pushed through. Daniel and Elena worked side by side, and though the labor was endless, both began to feel the land breathe again. Neighbors who had laughed at Daniel started to notice the difference, though they still muttered behind his back. But in town there was one man who noticed more than anyone, and he did not like what he saw. His name was Victor Hanley, a wealthy rancher who owned thousands of acres just beyond the ridge. He was tall, well-dressed, and known for getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. Years ago, he had tried to win Elena's hand, offering her family security in exchange for marriage. But she had refused, choosing instead to marry for love. That rejection had wounded his pride, and when her husband died, Victor expected Elena to come crawling back. Instead, she stayed alone on the ranch, clinging to her independence. Now, to Victor's disgust, Elena was no longer alone. A stranger, some wandering cowboy, had bought the ranch at auction and was working beside her. Worse still, the town was whispering that the widow and the drifter were slowly becoming partners, maybe more. Victor would not allow it. In his mind, Elena was supposed to belong to him, and if he could not have her, then no one else would. One hot afternoon, Daniel and Elena were repairing the barn roof when the sound of hooves thundered down the trail. Daniel climbed down the ladder as a group of riders approached. At their head was Victor Hanley, his polished boots shining in the sun, his hat tilted arrogantly. Behind him rode 4 armed men, all with hard eyes and restless hands. Victor reined in his horse at the edge of the yard. "Well, well," he called, his voice dripping with mockery. "So it's true. The drifter thinks he owns the Carter Ranch now." Daniel wiped the sweat from his brow and stood tall. "Not thinks, Hanley. I do own it. Papers say so. Sheriff signed them himself." Victor smirked. "Papers don't mean much out here. What matters is strength, and you don't have enough of it to keep this place." Elena had stepped down from the barn loft, her eyes flashing as she looked at Victor. "You have no business here," she said sharply. "Leave us." Victor's smile twisted. "Ah, Elena, still as fiery as ever. You made a mistake when you turned me down years ago. You could have had wealth, safety, a life without worry. Instead, you chose a man who left you with nothing, and now you cling to a ranch on the edge of ruin with a stranger who'll be gone by winter." Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between Victor and Elena. His voice was calm but steady. "You've said your piece. Now take your men and ride out." The air grew heavy as Victor's men shifted in their saddles. Hands brushed against holsters. The horses stamped nervously. But Daniel did not flinch. He stood in the dust with his shoulders squared, his rifle resting loosely but ready in his grip. Victor's smile faltered. He had expected fear, maybe even begging. Instead, he saw steel in Daniel's eyes. With a scoff, he turned his horse. "Enjoy your little victory, Carter. But this land won't stay yours for long. I'll be back, and when I come, you'll wish you never stepped foot on this soil." The riders thundered away, leaving dust swirling in the air. Daniel exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. Elena stepped beside him, her voice low. "He won't stop. Victor never forgets a grudge." Daniel nodded grimly. "Then we'll be ready." From that day, tension hung over the ranch like a storm cloud. Daniel began training harder, making sure every rifle was clean and every fence strong enough to slow intruders. At night, he patrolled the property, listening for hoofbeats in the dark. Elena supported him in every way she could, her courage never faltering. Though fear lurked in her heart, she refused to be driven from the only home she had ever known. One night, just as the moon rose high, trouble came. Daniel heard dogs barking and the distant rumble of horses. He grabbed his rifle and ran to the corral. Flames licked the edges of the barn. Fire had been set by unseen hands. The cattle bawled in panic, kicking against the fences. "Elena!" Daniel shouted, racing toward the barn. She was already there, throwing buckets of water on the flames. Together they fought the fire, choking on smoke, their arms aching from the effort. The blaze threatened to swallow the barn, but their determination held. At last the flames died down, leaving only blackened boards and the sharp smell of ash. Daniel staggered back, coughing, his shirt singed. Elena leaned against him, her face streaked with soot. Her eyes burned with fury. It was him, she whispered. Victor sent his men. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then next time we won't just defend. We'll stand our ground and end this. The next day, word of the attack spread through town. Some shook their heads, saying Daniel was a fool to stand against Victor. Others admired his courage but doubted he could last. But Daniel did not care for their opinions. He cared only for the ranch, for the cattle, and for the woman who refused to abandon him. As the sun set that evening, Elena stood on the porch, watching Daniel as he repaired the damage. Something shifted in her heart. For months she had guarded herself, refusing to trust again. But now she saw the truth. This man was different. He did not want her land, her name, or her obedience. He wanted only to fight beside her, to protect what mattered. Later that night, as they sat by the fire, Elena finally spoke what had weighed on her heart. When you came, I thought you were like all the others. I thought you would see me as part of the bargain, something to claim. But you've proven me wrong, Daniel. You see me as more. Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady. You're not part of any bargain, Elena. You're my partner, and I'll stand by you as long as I draw breath. Her gaze softened, and for the first time she allowed herself to believe it. But even as their bond grew stronger, danger pressed closer. Victor Hanley was not a man to back down. And when he returned, it would not be with threats or fire in the night. It would be with an army of riders, guns ready, determined to claim the ranch by force. Daniel knew the fight of his life was coming. And he also knew this: he would not run. He would stand shoulder to shoulder with Elena and defend the ranch not only as land but as the home and hope they had built together. The morning was calm, but Daniel felt the weight of coming trouble pressing on his shoulders. The ranch looked peaceful. The cattle grazed in the pasture, the barn stood scarred but solid after the fire, and smoke rose gently from the chimney of the farmhouse. Yet beneath the quiet there was tension, like the stillness before a storm. Elena sensed it too. As she carried water from the well, her eyes kept scanning the horizon. She knew Victor Hanley would not stay quiet for long. He was a man who always came back stronger and more determined. And now, with his pride wounded, he would stop at nothing to take what he believed belonged to him. That afternoon, while Daniel was repairing a corral gate, dust clouds appeared in the distance. Horses, many of them racing hard toward the ranch. Daniel dropped his tools and grabbed his rifle. "Elena," he called, his voice sharp. "They're coming." She ran to his side, her face pale but her jaw set. Together they watched as Victor and nearly a dozen men rode into view. They were armed, their eyes glinting with cruel confidence. Victor himself sat tall in the saddle, his fine coat spotless despite the dust. He looked like a man who believed victory was already his. Victor reined in his horse at the front gate. "Carter!" he shouted. "This is your last chance. Leave the ranch and I might let you go in one piece. Stay and you'll regret it." Daniel stepped forward, rifle in hand, his voice steady. "This land is mine, fair and square. I won't leave it and I won't let you take it." Victor sneered. "You think one man can stand against me and my men? You're a fool. And Elena, she belongs by my side, not with some drifter who got lucky at an auction." Elena's eyes flashed with anger. She moved forward, standing beside Daniel. Her voice rang clear. "I belong to no one, Victor Hanley. And I choose to stand with Daniel." The words cut like a blade. Victor's face twisted in fury. "So be it," he growled, raising his hand. His men began to move forward, horses snorting and hooves pounding the dirt. Daniel braced himself. He had built barricades along the fences, and he knew every inch of the land. He fired a warning shot into the air, his voice echoing across the field. "Come any closer and you'll find this ranch isn't as easy to take as you think." The standoff was tense. The rustlers hesitated, seeing the determination in Daniel's stance. He was only one man, but his eyes burned with the fire of someone who would never yield. Elena stood beside him, holding an old pistol she had taken from the farmhouse. She wasn't afraid anymore. Victor snarled, "Cowards! What are you waiting for? Ride them down!" But just as his men prepared to charge, The sound of more hoofbeats thundered from the opposite direction. A group of riders appeared over the ridge, neighbors from nearby homesteads, men who had watched Daniel work tirelessly to rebuild the ranch. They weren't wealthy or powerful, but they respected hard work and courage, and they had decided they would not stand by while Victor tried to crush another man's dream. The newcomers rode into the yard, rifles and shotguns ready. One of them, an older rancher named Harris, called out, "We're with Carter. If you want his land, you'll have to fight all of us." Victor's men shifted uneasily. The odds had changed, and they no longer looked so confident. Victor's face darkened, his pride wounded once again. He glared at Daniel, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't over. You may have won today, but I'll find another way." With a sharp tug on his reins, Victor turned his horse and his men followed. They rode off in a cloud of dust, their threats lingering in the air. As silence returned, Daniel lowered his rifle, his breath heavy with relief. He turned to the men who had come to help. "I owe you all more than I can say." Harris shook his head. "You don't owe us a thing, Carter. We saw the way you've worked this land, the way you've stood by that woman. That's worth standing for." The men rode back to their homesteads, leaving Daniel and Elena alone once more. She looked at him, her eyes shining with both pride and something deeper. "You didn't just defend this ranch," she said softly. "You defended me, and you showed everyone that this place has a future." Daniel set down his rifle and reached for her hand. "This land isn't just mine anymore, Elena, it's ours. Everything we build here, we build together." From that day forward, the ranch truly came alive. Daniel and Elena worked side by side, not as strangers bound by chance, but as partners united by choice. The cattle grew fat on the pasture. The barn was repaired stronger than before, and the fields yielded crops again. Neighbors who once mocked Daniel now tipped their hats when they saw him in town. Respect had been earned, not bought. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Daniel and Elena stood together on the porch. The air was quiet except for the soft lowing of cattle in the distance. Elena broke the silence, her voice gentle. "When I first met you, I thought you were just another man come to take what wasn't his. I never imagined you'd become the one to save this ranch or the one I'd want by my side." Daniel looked at her, his heart steady. "I never thought I'd find a home or someone to share it with. But I've found both here, with you." They stood in silence, watching the land they had fought so hard to protect. It was no longer just a cheap ranch bought at auction. It was their home, built with sweat, defended with courage, and strengthened by the bond they had forged. For Daniel, it was the end of drifting and the beginning of belonging. For Elena, it was proof that even in loss, hope could be reborn. Together they faced the wide-open West not as two lonely souls, but as partners, equals, and a family in the making. And as the stars began to shine over the Carter Ranch, both knew one thing with certainty. Their story was only beginning.